We are in the second week as we prepare for Easter, and we look at the last week of Jesus' life. We just prepare and we look forward to his crucifixion and his resurrection. So we just look at that last week. We've been doing just a real quick two-part series called Jesus Gets Angry, which, by the way, is probably not the best from a promotional standpoint, right? We're getting better at that, but I thought about that. We put that on our way. Hey, come to church. Learn about how Jesus gets angry. Right? So that may not have been the best. But hopefully what you found out last week and what we want to talk about this week is that's not a bad thing. In fact, the thing that you think Jesus might be angry about in your life or with you may not actually be that true. That if Jesus were to actually get angry, it might be at somebody else. And so last week what I talked about is we have two different groups of people on the face of the earth. You have people that don't follow God, and you have people that do follow God. And when Jesus was alive, the group of people that you might think he would get angry at would be the people that don't follow him, right? The Romans, the people that just aren't following God, you know, that kind of thing. But it wasn't. When Jesus decided to get angry, it was the people that followed God, and a very specific group. So today what we're going to look at is 2 days in Jesus' life where he just flips out. Okay, and this is the last week of his life. He's getting ready for the crucifixion and the be betrayed and all that kind of stuff. And in his last week of life, there are 2 days where he just, in 2 consecutive stories, just flips out. And I think it's kind of like, you know how somebody, you know, you've had a parent or a guardian or a spouse or somebody like that just gets mad for no reason, right? They're just angry and you've got no idea why they're angry. I remember my mom used to go into the kitchen, and I used to think that there was something wrong with our cupboards, right? Because they were had to slam them really hard to get them to shut, apparently. And so me and my dad, my brother, we'd be watching football, and the cupboards are being slammed, and pots are being thrown around, you know, and it was slow evolution of a young boy's mind to realize something's wrong, right? And I remember one day my dad was just brazen enough, because you know what she's mad about. She's mad about that she's cleaning the kitchen while we're sitting in there watching football. I didn't realize that at the time. But one time my dad was just brazen enough to be like, hey, could you keep it down in there? We're watching football! Right? And so there's this, I'm not saying that's the right way to handle things, okay? But there's just kind of this tension or this anger, and it's unexplainable, it's undefined, and nobody explains what's going on. And that's kind of what's going on with the disciples and Jesus. The disciples were these group of people that followed Jesus around. And Jesus just consecutively, in 2 different stories, just gets irate. And there's not much explanation as to why. All right? There's not much explanation as to why that's happening. And they just kind of have to guess. And we're left with the same thing. As we read these stories, we're left with kind of that same thing. Like we kind of have to guess. And it's probably not too hard of a conclusion to draw. So here we go. We're going to look at Mark chapter 11. In Mark chapter 11, verse 12, it says this. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Now you got to understand this about me. I'm a Bible college student, right? I have a degree from a Bible college. I've studied the Greek and the Hebrew and everything, and with all that knowledge, I went and looked up fig trees on Wikipedia. And what I found out was that fig trees, there is a season and not season. The season they produce fruit. And when they are in season and when they are producing fruit, they produce leaves. And they are very leafy and they produce the fruit. And so Jesus goes over to this tree and he finds this tree and there's no figs on it. And it says because it wasn't the season for figs. And I'm sure the disciples were like, why did he think he was going to find figs on the tree? It's not the season for figs. But this tree has the audacity to have leaves out of season. In other words, it's shouting out like none of the other trees in Israel. This tree is shouting out, hey, I've got leaves, which means I've got fruit. And Jesus walks over to it and he finds nothing but leaves. Next verse. Then he said to the tree, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard him say it. It actually says that he cursed the tree in Matthew. So he comes up to this tree. He doesn't find any fruit on it. He goes, searches everywhere. Nothing's there. He gets angry at the tree. He curses the tree and kills the tree. And then they keep on walking. Right? You've had car rides like that with Mom, right? You just snaps and then we just keep on driving. And you go, that's to keep my mouth shut, right? So that's what Jesus does. He gets angry at the tree and they just keep on walking. I just almost imagine that like some of the disciples like filed to the back of the line as they're walking along and be like, did you just see what he did? Yeah, no, he just like cursed that fig tree and he was like, why did he think there would be figs on it? There's not the season for figs. I know, right? And they're just trying to figure it out and he's like, he's mad about something. Let's just not say anything. Okay, so and then they follow him into Jerusalem. And this is the very next story in all the Gospels. The very next story doesn't say there's any in-between thing. They walk in to Jerusalem, into the temple. Now, some of you may have heard this story before. So Jesus goes into the temple, just right after this cursing of the fig tree. Walks into the temple. And now just to describe like what the temple was for. It was like God's beacon, right? It was like the place that God had built and created and designed so people could come meet with him, right? So they could come and bring their sacrifices and their offerings. And so people all over the region, everywhere, Jews from everywhere would come to the temple to meet with God. But what some people had figured out is that when you've got people traveling all over a region to get to a place, that's an opportunity to make money, right? How many people have gone to Disney World with the intention of not buying anything once you're in the park? Anybody done that? I'm cheap, so I'm like, there ain't no way I'm paying $5 for a bottle of water once we're in there. I don't care how thirsty or hungry. But when it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you've been there all day and it's 98 degrees outside, that $5 bottle of water looks cheap. Right? So I'm gonna go get that. And if I can just buy my child a $17 chimichanga, and that's gonna make my life better, then here's $17, you know. And that's kind of like the Jews had this, they were one of the first to figure out that when people are traveling all over a region to get to a place, that there's money to be made there. And so what they would do at the temple is they would set up just whatever people traveling would need. So one of the things they would need is they would need to change their money. All over the region, different kinds of money everywhere, and they would come and change their money into the right currency to be offered at the temple. But the thing is, with every person that changes money, there was an opportunity to skim off the top and weigh the scales unfair. In fact, you know the reason we have like the divots on the edge of our quarter, right? It actually goes all the way back to them because they would take the coins, these money changers, they'd take out a pocket knife and they'd just shave a little bit of the gold off the outside of it, right? And there was no divots around there to mark that, so they would just kind of shave that off and they would just take just a little bit at a time, and they would shave all this gold off. And so they were literally cheating people as they would change the money. The other thing they would do is people would come with their sacrifices to God, and the kind of the objective was people were supposed to bring the very best, and they were supposed to bring it with them. But they knew, you know what, people aren't going to want to drag a bull or a sheep or, you know, a crate of doves all the way with them. So they could just come here, and when they get here, they can just buy one and they sacrifice it. Piece of cake, right? So what they would do is they would bring out the nicest sheep. And they would be like, look at this, what a beautiful sacrifice to God this would make, right? This is just absolutely great. And the person would be like, yeah, that's worth the money. So they would be like, holy, like, yeah, I'm going to offer like the best sheep in the pen. So they'd be like, yeah, we'll do that. You can pick it up at customer service, right? So then they would take this sheep and they would put it back here and they would take out like this scrawny one and they would give it to the priest and then they would go sacrifice like this scrawny sheep worth like $5. And they were constantly in the process. They were there to make money. And they justified it because these are the leaders of the temple. And they're saying, yeah, hey, this temple, it's for the temple, right? It's going to make money. And so Jesus is already angry. Right? He's already angry at the fig tree. The disciples are following behind him all quietly and not quite sure of what's going on. Maybe Jesus just doesn't like vegetation, you know, and they're walking in. Jesus throws open the doors or goes into this like courtyard where all this money changing and all these sheep are being sold and there's livestock everywhere and there's people just milling them out. It would have been like a modern day Walmart without a roof, you know, it's just everything in there. And then this is what happens. Back to Mark 11. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. So not just the people that are selling, but the people that have traveled all over and they're actually buying. He overturned the tables of the money changers. Now, even if you're not like really into like the Gospels and everything, you've probably come across like a Jesus movie on cable or something. And there, like, very few Jesus movies ever depict this right. Usually what it is, it's Jesus, it's one of those movies where Jesus has an English accent for some reason. And he walks in and he, like, this is how they depict this. He goes up to the money table, like, no, this is my Father's house, and he like flips it over like that and the table goes like, eek, like, I don't think that's what happened. I think Jesus storms in there and he literally started driving people out. He said, driving those out who were buying and selling. How do you drive somebody out? Like, how do you do that? You like kind of nudge them. How does a bouncer get somebody to leave, right, a bar? Like, it's kind of an awkward situation. It's kind of like, so Jesus was like bouncing people, right? So he's like, come on, no, good, and he may have been yelling at them, we don't know. He's drying them out. He overturned the table, so money is like flying everywhere. The money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry. What did that look like? Right? So people are walking in there with their merchandise, just going about, and all of a sudden here appears Jesus. And Jesus is like, nope, take that out of here. Like, I can't even hardly picture it in my head. He's saying, take it out of here. I don't know. I like to envision, I don't know. He probably like slapped it out of their hands, right? I'm just ad-libbing right there, but right? So they walk in with stuff, and they're just like, not my house, right? And so he's like going crazy, and it probably lasted, like, sometimes we envision this happening for like 30 seconds or a minute. This would have been like maybe an afternoon, okay? Now just imagine what this would be like. This is not something that Jesus has been given authority by the temple to do. So this would be very much like you walking into Walmart or Meijer and just start clearing the shelves. Just throwing stuff off, take the oranges and then throwing them at people and start chasing people out of Walmart. Jesus is causing a scene. What do you think his disciples are thinking? Like, he's lost it. Like, first he gets mad, he curses a tree, and now he comes in here, and he's like getting mad at all these people and won't let them do anything. He is angry, and they're probably just sitting there, and people are kind of like, are you with him? And we're like, kind of with him. Maybe they tried to help him, like, shoo, I don't know what they were thinking. It doesn't say they helped out or got involved. And this is the only explanation that Jesus gives. As he taught them, so Jesus is teaching angry. Those are my favorite sermons to preach, like sermons where I'm angry. I don't do that very often, so don't worry about it. As he taught them, he said, is it not written, my house, we call the house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. So Jesus is angry, he clears out the temple, and then what they do is they pack up and they just walk out. So he like had made this whip and he was chasing the sheep and the cattle out, and he just like dropped it and they walked away. And they're walking out, and then the story kind of wraps up with they walk out and they're leaving Jerusalem, and as they're leaving they say this fig tree that he had cursed. And Peter looks over at the fig tree and he says, look, the tree you cursed. And they look over and that fig tree is like scorched earth. It's like dead, shriveled up, dead, gone. It is never going to produce fruit again. And then the story ends, right? And we're just kind of done with that story, and you walk away, and just like your mom or dad or that person that kind of flipped out, you've got to kind of figure out, why is he so angry? And I think that those two stories tie together everything that Jesus is angry about. And like I said last week, you can learn a lot about somebody by what they get angry at and what they don't get angry at. And Jesus is obviously angry in these stories, not at these people, not the people that don't follow him or don't claim to follow him. He's angry with these folks, the people that are following God or claiming to follow God. When Jesus decides to get angry, these are the folks he gets angry. Now, what do we do with this story? I've got a couple points that I think we really you have to walk away with. Like if you were to go and take this story and sit down and just think about it a little bit, even though there's not a lot of explanation for it, I think you have to draw just like a couple of basic conclusions. And the first one is this. Jesus expects a claim to have a matching result. Jesus expects a claim to be having a matching result. He expected that tree, if it's going to claim that it's bearing fruit, he's going to walk over there and it better have some fruit on it, because that's the claim that it made. Which is very much how you and I are, right? One day there's going to be some poor, unfortunate sap that's going to decide he wants to marry one of my daughters. Right? And he may be just a really awesome, wonderful person. I'm trying to arrange a wedding with somebody here in the church and their kid, but I don't know if that's going to work. But anyway, you know, he's going to decide that he wants to like marry one of my children. And I may even, as a pastor, I may even stand up and like marry them, right? They may come up and they may choose me to do that, right? And he's going to say vows. And I expect him to keep those vows, right? And not only then, but up until this moment in my life, my oldest daughter is 12, to the point where she gets married, I'm going to tell her over and over again. Every once in a while, I just pause the television, and I turn over to my daughter and I say something along the lines like, hey, you make sure that you pick somebody that's going to do what they say, that they're going to hold to the claim, right? We expect that. And if he doesn't do that, like I may just lose respect for him depending on what it is, or I may we may have words, right? And words may turn into other things. But anyway, there is an attitude where we expect somebody to do what they claim. In fact, I think that may be the #1 characteristic about how you determine someone's character. Across the board, no matter what kind of background you're from, you expect somebody to do what they say. And Jesus is exactly the same way. If you're going to claim that you have fruit, if you're going to claim that you are like God's people and you're going to run His temple, like you better do that right. So Jesus expects that. I think that's a very critical point, because sometimes the way we view the love of God is like a passive grandpa. Right? I don't know if you had a passive grandpa. My grandpa was passive aggressive. That's probably more the better term. But he would just kind of like let a lot of things slide. In fact, most things he would let slide. And so I kind of grew up with this wrong kind of thinking, that because he doesn't say anything, because he doesn't mention anything, because he never confronts me about anything, that's love. He's just going to accept everything that I do, everything about that. And then there were times, not very many times, where he was aggressive, right? So when I'm 13, I decided that I'm going to start chewing tobacco. And again, I'm from northwest Nebraska, so that's not that uncommon. Most boys and girls decide that they're going to start chewing tobacco. Anyway, at 13. So I decided I'm going to do this. And I didn't just decide I was going to chew tobacco. I decided I was going to like do it and be addicted to it when I was 13 years old. Really stupid, right? So I started doing this, and I kind of started doing it around my grandpa, and by the time I was like 14 or 15, like I just realized that grandpa wasn't going to say anything, so I had like the whole horseshoe, right, in my mouth around him, and he never said anything, and I just assumed that this was grandpa accepting, right? And then one day, he just like grabbed a hold of my lip. He was a short guy. He grabbed a hold of my lip, and he pulled it down, and he's like, "What do you got in there?" And he was like, "You need to quit," and he just like smacked it out of my mouth. And from that, I took that when he accepts or doesn't say anything, that's love. And when he does say something, or when he gets aggressive, that's not love. Now, whether we care to admit it or not, sometimes that's our vision of God. Like, well, if God really loved me, he just, whatever. And Jesus is like, no, I expect you to hold to your claim. If you're going to claim to be fruitful, then you need to be fruitful. Now, in the church, We've got like a problem. Not LifeBridge, it's just the church, and it's been a problem for the last 2,000 years, and it'll always continue to be a problem. But here becomes the problem. There's basically three groups of people. There's people that don't follow Jesus and don't claim to follow Jesus. And then there's people that claim to follow Jesus and actually follow Jesus, right? But then you've got that third group of people who claim to follow Jesus but don't follow Jesus, right? And this is an extremely important point, okay? Because so much confusion in our country, right, in our church houses, or we try to figure out God, and we're like, well, does God forgive this, and does God forgive that, and where does God draw the line? And we kind of try to lump everybody in one big pot and kind of God kind of divides these good people into bad people, and that's not really it at all. God's over here going, okay, these are the people that don't claim to follow me. Well, cool, because they're following the claim. And you got these people over here that claim to follow him, but they're actually doing it, and so they're following the claim. Where the frustration becomes is this group that their claim doesn't match their result. Right? Claim doesn't match the fruit. Now that causes a problem for everybody. That's a problem for everybody. Excuse me. For those who are in the church or follow Christ, claim to follow Christ, they've got, excuse me, they have got this going on over here, and they're claiming to follow Christ, but then there's these people that are kind of like associated with them or look like them or have cool mustaches like them. Who, that is a deal. Like when you follow Jesus, you get the ability to grow a cool mustache. So they're in that category, and what does that do for them? That confuses them, because they're like, wait a minute. So I'm a follower of Jesus, and you're a follower of Jesus, but you don't live like this, and you don't do this, and you don't obey that, and so that's confusing, and it creates a problem. And then over here you've got these folks that are looking at this. What's the number one criticism that people have against Christians? A bunch of hypocrites, right? And they are on the money. Like I'm over here with my mustache totally agreeing with them. Like absolutely, there are so many hypocrites that claim to follow Jesus but don't actually follow Jesus. So they don't like understand Jesus or God because of this group that claims to follow him but doesn't follow him, right? So that's a huge, huge issue. We'll get to it a little bit later. So the second thing I wanted to put up there that we draw from these passages, faith must be productive. Like you can't have a relationship with God. You can't believe in God. You can't authentically just go, you know what, God, I'm yours. I'm all in. I follow you. I am a disciple. I am a believer. And not produce fruit or be productive in your relationship with him. Now, I want to really get this down to something super clear and super concise. This is your take home, okay? You need to decide what is your claim, okay? And let's just imagine you're sitting at a desk with Jesus, and Jesus has got a form that he wants you to fill out, and he pushes it across to the other side of the desk. And oh, thank you. He just pushes that aside to the other side of the desk, and it's got two boxes on it. There's only two boxes. One says, I follow Christ, and one says, I. Now maybe what I would say to you is, it's really, I would love for you to say, I follow Christ. I check that box. Absolutely, I follow him. But I would have a warning. I would have a warning that I would just come to you and say, but you don't want to do that unless you mean that. And it's okay. It's not ideal. It's not the best. It's okay to check the box that says, no, I don't really follow Christ. Like, I'm kind of there. I'm kind of thinking about it. I'm kind of interested in it, but I'm not there. I tell you what, the people that I have the most respect for are the people that, like, they come to me and they're like, you know, I don't come to church very often, and I try what I can, or I try to follow Jesus, but honestly, the problem is, like, I'm just not there. I just don't believe. I haven't made that decision. I don't want to do like this fake thing. I have an immense amount of respect for them. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't come to church. You should, I'd love for you to just kind of keep hearing it and kind of keep working on that and keep making that decision. Absolutely, please come back. I don't want to scare you off. But at the same time, it has to be one of those two. And if you're sitting there going, oh, I wish there was a third box. I wish there was a maybe box. Because that's the one I'd like to check. I hate it, but there's no maybe box. It's either you're all in or you're all out. And until you make that decision to be like all in, like Jesus would rather just say, just stay here until you're ready to follow me. In fact, Jesus even comes to people, and this isn't something we do very often as pastors and leaders, but he comes to people and he says, you know, you should count the cost. Like a king doesn't go off to war or off to battle or whatever and not think about whether or not he can actually pull it off. A guy with 200 soldiers does not go up against a guy with 10,000 soldiers. He wants to know that he can pull it off. And so he says that to people. He says, you should count the cost. You should really look at it and say, do you really want to follow Jesus? If not, don't check that box. But at the same time, maybe there's some of you that have been coming to church for a long time and you've been checking that Christian box, but you've really been checking that maybe box. You're not quite in. You may need to uncheck that box. Because when Jesus decides to get angry at somebody, again, it's not the people that don't even claim to follow him. Like I said last week, it's not the liberals, it's not the politicians, it's not Hollywood, right? When Jesus gets angry, it's those people that have made the claim but have not decided to follow him. I just want to pray with you today that as you think through that decision, or maybe you reevaluate that decision, that God would lead you in that. Let's pray. Father, we want to honor you with our life. And I pray that today, if maybe there's folks here today, or there's a lot of us here today that haven't really put that all in, and they just need to go ahead and be all in. God, I pray that you would help them to check that box. And God, I just pray that you be with the others as they begin to think about you and have a relationship. I want so much for them to have a relationship with you because I know how good it is, but I don't, and I know you don't want that to not be real. And so I just pray that across the board, everybody in here would be authentic before you. And I pray that in Christ's name. Amen.